Thank you everyone for taking time on the last day of the conference to join this session. My name is Dharmesh Patel. I'm part of Google Cloud Healthcare Solutions team. And today I'm going to talk about what we have done with implementing provider directory API on Google Cloud and how payers can take that as a reference implementation and implement in their environments. So just to start with, we'll provide some overview of what provider directory API is, and then we'll dive into the details. Just last year, there was a new rule published by Office of National Coordinator and Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services called Patient Interoperability and Patient Access APIs, which puts a requirement on the health insurance companies' payers to provide API level access to the provider directory data. And what does that mean? So we'll look into that in a minute. So as a guidelines, CMS also mentioned that the provider directory data needs to conform to an HL7 FHIR implementation guide called DaVinci PDEX PlanNET, which is part of the PDEX set of implementation guides. What type of data should be supported by these APIs? It needs to generally support all the health insurance plans and associated network information, organizations, providers that are participating into those networks, healthcare services that are provided by the organizations as well as providers, and the locations at which those services are provided. And then also it covers pharmacy locations and hours of operation type of information as well. So with that data in mind, what the IG is defining is the FHIR implementation guide, which was published by a working group under hl7.org. They published an IG which is composed of different FHIR profiles, value sets, code systems, search parameters, and some extensions, which are all documented. If you click on this link, you can get to that website and you can access that. So essentially, a health plan or a health insurance company, they need to provide API level access to this type of data. And then so that third-party applications, which are typically created for members and the consumers, can have easy access to the data. And now I'll dive deeper into what are all the resources involved into DaVinci PlanNET IG. The boxes here indicates all the resources, and as you can see, it's a spaghetti. Those connectivity between those resources shows the dependencies. Some of them are hard dependencies, and some of them are dotted, which are optional. But that's how you connect all this information together. So next, what we will look at is how a reference implementation about provider directory API, how we at Google implemented this. And we'll look at three things here. We will look at the data harmonization capabilities and that we have provided or that we have built that you can leverage in your implementation, which is basically provider directory data. If you see today, they are not in FHIR format, and the data have other issues like they are stored in different systems, and they may not be up to date, clean, and complete. So there is a solution required to basically cleanse the data, curate the data, make the master data of the providers and associated entities all very clean and current. So that's first step, right? Then you have to harmonize that data, convert it into FHIR, and then you can serve that FHIR data to the applications who wants to consume that. I'll also touch upon FHIR Store Explorer, which is a Google product on top of the FHIR data store that we have already talked a lot into this conference. We've introduced how we could potentially use FHIR data store for other use cases like patient access API, as well as for bringing in CDA data, HL7V2 data, and so on. And some of the capabilities it support in terms of supporting of implementation guides, FHIR profiles, custom search parameters, and so on. And we'll look at that today. And then we will finally look at it from an application developer perspective. So if I am an application developer, a third-party application developer that wants to consume these APIs, how would I consume it? what is the process for me to request access? How can I register my application so that I have authorized access to the APIs? And then how can I browse API documentation? How can I try before I use it? And then we will execute some search queries if there is a time. So we'll get into the data harmonization. So what we have done in Google Cloud is we built using the Google Cloud Managed Services. We have uh, a, a, a sample implementation of how would you typically harmonize your data that you, let's say you got that data extracted. Now that data is available in CSV format, comma separated values files. How can you take it, convert it into FHIR? So we have a three-stage process here. First thing is you need to bring in that data into Google Cloud, stage it into our object store called Google Cloud Storage bucket, which where we store all the files, and then we convert those files through a batch data flow jobs into NDJSON or JSON files, and then we consume those JSON files and convert it into FHIR and store it into a FHIR store. This process of converting the data from NDJSON to FHIR is configurable through customer provided FHIR mappings. And I'll talk about the FHIR mappings in my next slide. And then this is basically the architecture for how you would do it. So I will go over this first, and then we'll get into the mappings. So what I have here is the Google Cloud Platform. I have a project where I have implemented this pipeline, and then I have already executed 2 batches. So in interest of time, because I have only 10 minutes for this presentation, I would not go and run this pipeline, but I'll showcase the execution of the pipeline. So I have executed a couple of batches here. We're going to look at so this is the bucket that we have created as part of the solution. And what you would do is you would drop your CSV files. Like I have all the CSV files which basically are defined as part of the DaVinci profile. But you can have your own CSV file in your own format, and then you can use the vessel mappings to convert it in a way you want to convert. We'll go over that. Once you drop the file, there are a few jobs that gets kicked off. And Dataflow is a Google Cloud managed service for running Apache Beam. It essentially runs Apache Beam job. So you have to write your Apache Beam jobs, which we have pre-written that you can reuse and you can use it. That would take the data from the CSV file and convert it and ingest it into. So that's the ingestion job, which, as you can see, it ran some time ago, and then it would create the NDJSON, and then the next set of job, which is the harmonization job, which will pick up the NDJSON files from another bucket, and then it will write it to the FHIR store. Once that data is written into the FHIR store, this is the FHIR Explorer, by the way, that I was going to demonstrate, which is the third part, which I'll get into details. But this is where the data will be made available into the FHIR format after the entire pipeline finishes its execution. So that's the data harmonization pipeline, taking the data into CSV format, making it available into the FHIR stores so that it can be consumed by the applications. Moving on to the next one is how do you convert this data to FHIR from one form to another form? So I'm going to look. So we have taken this approach of opinionated CSVs that we've defined just for this reference implementation. But if you have your own CSV files, you can use that as well, but you'll have to change the mappings accordingly. In this case, we took the CSV files, we first converted it into JSON, which is the straight JSON, and I'll show you what it looks like. And then once you run those through our transformation job, which uses the Whistle transformation library, and Whistle was introduced in another session by my colleague Kalyan, and that job will basically convert the data from your CSV JSON files into the final FHIR resources. And we'll look at it how it looks. So if you look at this, I have this bunch of JSON files that I have, which are the input files where it is very flat, and this was generated out of CSV. So you take a CSV record, and it will create one JSON file. And if you have a CSV file with multiple records, it will create an NDJSON file with each line represents this one record. This is the input record, right, which provides all the data into the flat format. And then what you do is you do the mappings. This is the mapping that we provide out of the box. We have open sourced some of the mappings for other type of transformations, that you can use as a reference to create your own specific mappings. And then once those mappings execute, you get the final output, which is basically an execute bundle, or basically a bundle of type transaction that you can execute against the Firestore. So this is a transaction bundle with all the resources that you need gets created. In this case, it is creating an organization that maps to the same set of data that we get from the source file. So, so that's how the mapping works. And now we will get into the next part of my presentation of the FHIR viewer. So the FHIR viewer, so the Firestore, Google's Firestore supports implementation of different implementation guides. So you can import and you can enable these implementation guides. In this case, you can see that DaVinci PlanNET has been enabled, which depends on US Code 310, and that's all enabled. That means if you try to insert data into this Firestore, it will be validated against those profiles. So I have pinned these resources. We support all the FHIR resources under R4. And I will just take an example of one, like for example, organization. If you look at this organization, actually I'm running out of my time. I have 74 resources in this Firestore, and I'm going to essentially look at one of these, right? So this has been imported through my previous batch job that I showed. And as you can see, this resource itself points to its meta attribute, points to different profiles that we have used this been validated against. So obviously organization is a resource which is part of many profiles, right? It's part of the organization profile, sorry, it's part of the base profile, Karin profile, as well as US Core 3.1.1, as well as the PlanNET organization profile as well. So it says what all validation it has gone through. That way we know that this is a validated resource. So, and then something else you can look at it is when you import this IG, you can also have a search parameters imported and enabled and configured in the Firestore. So those search parameters basically will also give you becomes very handy for you to provide your custom search parameters and enable them. In this case, it is US Core, but I'm pretty sure there is other type of parameters for other IGs as well. There are a bunch of them, so I don't want to go too much details into it. But I think that's where I would essentially end it. I wanted to cover more, but unfortunately don't have time on that. So search parameters, we covered that. And then the portal, which is app registration and API documentation. We have a product called Health APIX, which is an open source portal that you could implement it. And it lets you as an application developer go in, register your app and request access to the API. And then we have API documentation listing all the methods that you can execute on the APIs. Different resources are also made available, and you can execute. You can actually do a full OAuth to dance and get the token with a valid scopes, and that would let you execute the queries. For example, I have this provided directory search application which is pre-registered, approved to access this particular product. So I just or this API, I can run that, and when I run it, I get some calls. So I'm actually making a curl call from the API docs. This is Open API spec, and I get this data, which is basically the 74 resources that we saw are directly coming from the Firestore, where I have this data. So with that, I will stop, and I will take questions on anything that. And at the end, we can open it up so that we can take the question, or if there are already questions in the chat, then I can answer those.
Yes, there are a couple. Do you want me to read them to you?
Yeah, that would be great.
Sure. So the first question is, what is the format of these CSV files? The fields order must be described somewhere. Is that Google format or DaVinci defined format?
There is no format that is defined by DaVinci. So what we did was we basically created our own format, and we are taking those that CSV, and then we created a visual maps for that. So you have two options there. You can either convert your exported data into the standard format that we could publish. If you like it, you can reach out to me and I will share that with you. Or you can publish it in whatever CSV format, but then you'll have to write your own visual maps for that. So if you convert your data into the CSV format, which will output this JSON, then you can reuse all of these visual maps that we have created. And so you have to do the upfront work to basically generate your data in a CSV format that is compliant to our opinionated CSV. But if you don't want to do that, then you can export it into your proprietary CSV files and then update the mapping files, right? All these mappings, visual mappings, to match your data.
Okay. The next question is, which stakeholder provides the source data for provider directory API?
So in our case, we use the publicly available data from CMS, from NPAS. NPAS is the National Provider Enumeration System, and other data sources, publicly available data sources for our testing and demo. But typically, if you are a health insurance company, you should be getting that data as part of your data that you're getting from providers in form of claims and others that you can use. And I think provider directory, if you have in your organization as a health insurance company, you should use that. If not, then you'll have to reach out to your providers in terms of how to get that data.
Okay. The next one is, different patients may have different insurance companies. Does it mean the described data pipeline would be different for different patients?
No, it won't be different for different patient. It will be per insurance company. So let's say if I'm implementing this for insurance company A, then that insurance company will ingest all the data and make the APIs available to the patients. So all the patients that are members of that insurance provider can have access to that. And if they are, and if they move to another insurance company, then they will have similar functionality provided by another insurance company, who if decides to use Google's product, then they will use it from. They will have their own separate data pipeline for that.
Okay, the next question is, did you tackle reconciling duplicate providers during updates?
Yes, I did. Actually, I didn't cover that, but I can quickly go back to my slides and talk about that a little bit. So I think in this data pipeline, we have two file stores, right? The intermediate file store is where the data is loaded first, where we will have, let's say we have three different pipelines here, one loading organization from the provider directory data, another one loading organization from patient, Karen, Blue Button IG compliant data, or maybe it is loading, US core organization in here. Eventually those practitioners or organizations needs to be reconciled because they are same organization or same practitioners. There is this reconciliation logic that we've implemented, which will reconcile it into one resource. So finally, when you consume it from the final file store, you will get one single resource out of that.
All right, the next one is your interpretation that CMS provider directory requirements allow OAuth 2 auth rather than unauthenticated access?
For the provider directory data, I think it is open to the interpretation, but the best practices are that you should use client credentials grant type, which is basically application level authentication to access data from provider directory data, because it is not patient specific data. If it is patient access API though, right, which involves patient data, which might require consent from the patient for the app to access that data, it is better to do OAuth 2 authorization code grant type, which is compliant to Smart on FHIR application launch.
All right, it looks like we have two more. The first is, does Google FHIR API support fine-grained scopes for resources, e.g. app can only read patient's observation condition, but not write to it?
Yes, Google's FHIR server supports fine-grained access control on the smart FHIR scope. So if your application needs access to patient's observation and it supplies a smart on FHIR compliant token with the right scopes, um, Google FHIR server has ability to control access to the resources based on the scopes and the scopes associated to the smart on FHIR token. This is still a capability that is in preview. It is not generally available. And if you are interested in, you can ping me and we can talk about it more.
Okay, the final question. What do you do with atypical providers, those that do not have NPIs? How do you distinguish between them, as there is not a unique ID? Also, do you do the provider data deduplication?
We kind of a support. So first question, right? There are two questions here. So NPI, the National Provider Identifier, we expect that it is made available into the source data. We don't enrich the data in this process, not in the harmonization pipeline. We expect that the enrichment, deduplication of the data happens upfront here. But then there is this NPI data. If you want to enrich your provider data, which doesn't have NPI, and you want to enrich it with NPI, you can certainly use. And we have a partner solution that runs in front of our data harmonization solution. And some of those partners provide that capabilities to enrich your provider directory data with publicly available data. For example, NPAs, in this situation, NPI. Right. So that's your first question. The second question is, how do I reconcile? I mean, how do I deduplicate? You have two options there. You can deduplicate using this partner solution that runs in front of data harmonization, or you can let it go and then let the reconciliation job figure out based on the reconciliation rules how to deduplicate those provider records.
Great. I think we've gotten through the list. And we are slightly over time, so we'll wrap it up. Dharmesh, thank you so much for your session today. And everybody, don't forget to rate the session in the Whova app.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you.